late 70s, 6 couples and 3 children took part in a unique experiment. They chose to spend 13 months living in the Iron Age. Forsaking all the trappings of the modern era, they lived, worked, slept and ate as their ancestors would have done 2,300 years ago.
Can I have one person hold each leg? Yeah. Where do you reckon to stick it?
The series, brainchild of television producer John Percival, was the first ever reality TV programme. But it wasn't built on conflict and artificial pressure. No one was voted out, though some did choose to leave, and the cameras only visited for 2 days a week.
That's when you can tell us it's not.
30 years on, What Happened Next revisits members of the group to find out how the experience shaped their lives, and what became of the people who chose to live a year in the Iron Age.
I don't take the view that I should live a primitive life because I am an Iron Age man. I'm just 2,000 years later.
Living in the past was an experiment in reconstructing an ancient way of life. For one entire year, a group of 12 young people and 3 small children first built, then lived and worked on a replica of an ancient British farm, cut off from the modern world. They didn't attempt to become ancient Britons, that was obviously impossible. But for the whole of that year they wore, or didn't wear, the same kind of clothes, lived in the same kind of buildings, raised the same crops and livestock, and used the same tools which archaeologists and historians tell us were used more than 2,000 years ago, in the Iron Age.
From the moment I first heard about the project, when Sarah presented me with a newspaper article which had some details of it, I knew instantly that that was what I really wanted to do. I hadn't crystallised it in terms of an Iron Age project, but I knew I wanted to live in a primitive way, and that was this absolutely identified with what it was I wanted to do.
The settlement, about an acre in extent, was laid out in a woodland clearing on the high chalk downland of North Dorset. Here, in early spring, the volunteers had to set out to build their own home. For the first few weeks they wore modern clothes and used simple modern tools, but the materials they used and the plans to which they worked were authentic enough. The site plan was based on archaeological excavations of real Iron Age settlements, one of them only a mile or 2 away. The positions of the buildings are indicated by dots representing the post holes where the main supports were dug into the ground. These formed the only blueprint for a whole array of buildings clustered around the big roundhouse, which was to be the focal point of the village, and the place where all 12 volunteers would have to live. But for the moment, they had to put up with tents, modern camping equipment, and imported supplies. They had to build their prison before they could live in it.
We went with an expectation that it would be hard, an expectation that we might not succeed, that I thought that I might become ill or injured and it might be quite serious. But I was willing to do that and try and see this project through and stick to the rules we were given.
Everyone was given a crash course in Iron Age techniques before they started.
Well, that isn't going to quite make it.
The rafters of the roundhouse had to be carried on a ring beam supported by an inner circle of tall oak posts. This kind of carpentry isn't an exact science. Each piece of timber has to be individually tailored to fit.
Let's put it flatways up. Good looking flatways. Move back. Just onto the thing. Put it down, Peter. Okay. Drop it down and rest there. No, don't push it, because you'll push over the stone.
As work on the roof went ahead, they began to prepare for the next stage of the building of the roundhouse, the daubing of the walls.
We mix the daub from one part clay, one part soil. The worst part of it really is getting the lumps out of the clay. Once the clay is even, you mix in enough soil to make it sticky. And then you mix in quite a lot of either pig bristle or some sort of animal hair and straw. It stays very easily on the walls if you mix it right, so it's very sticky.
The group tried a number of different thatching systems until they found the one which seemed most effective.
With the old system, you put on a bundle individually and tied it as a bundle to the previous one. With this system, you have two people laying on the thatch. The thatchers that came told us that you had a dressing layer first, which stops any drips coming through, or hopefully, if it...
Building the roof was of the roundhouse took an incredible long amount of time. I don't like heights, so I couldn't do the work from inside because we'd lay on the straw and then it had to be sewn, so you needed a team working on the roof on the outside laying the straw down and then a team stitching from inside. But when we were about 2/3 of the way up, I did notably actually fall off, which meant that I slid down like a huge slide, zoom, onto the ground.
The wettest spring of the century didn't help, and delay followed delay as they struggled to finish all the buildings in the teeth of the cold and wet.
Hard to find the motivation sometimes, I find, to really work flat out all day when you feel the starting day is getting further away. I think the real motivation that I'm looking for is having to be self-sufficient, having to produce all my own food and things like this. And at the moment I feel, we're piddling around, not getting started.
The first time of the project, before we actually got into living in the house ourselves, was sheer hell. It was very cold, it was very wet. It was extremely hard work, and it was quite hard to keep the morale up. But several of us at that point in time questioned whether we were going to see it through.
If anyone was going to give up, now, if ever, was the time to do it.
Sleeping on frozen ground, I actually had chilblains on my thighs, which I've never experienced before or since, luckily. It was very uncomfortable. We were wearing our ordinary clothes, but without the 20th century washing facilities, and it was actually very, very difficult.
Nobody gave up. For the first 10 weeks, they've been obliged to depend on supermarket supplies for food and drink, on canvas and polythene for shelter, on paraffin lamps and Wellington boots, all the mess and compromise of a camping holiday. But on May Day, as they promised themselves, they got rid of the lot.
building the roundhouse was a fantastic achievement. In comparison with the tents, this was like a 5-star hotel. We were warm, we were comfortable, we had the fire in the middle of the house.
Once we were in there and we had a central fire and a sense of community, things became very different for most of the time. And I think we've all got really fond memories of sitting around the fire in the middle, still dodging the smoke, but actually getting some heat from the fire, and telling stories,
Yes.
doing odd tasks in the evening.
Milking always had to be done before breakfast. Lindsay was one of the volunteer milkmaids. Another was Sarah. Later on in the year, people would have swapped jobs quite often, but at this stage, most of the milking was done by the 3 girls. Goats prefer to be looked after by the same people every day, otherwise they get anxious and confused. Breakfast was almost always the same. A porridge of boiled wheat, which had been slowly cooking all night long, with milk and honey if there was any. No crunchy breakfast cereals.
The food was an issue. It was very, very boring. We ate boiled wheat for breakfast every day, except Sundays. Sundays we had a treat. We had a little bit of our home-baked bread, which was unleavened, very heavy, very solid, and a smear of honey, and maybe a smear of butter. So that was our treat. So the diet was very boring.
Whatever the difficulties, the villagers found ways of coping with most of their everyday domestic problems, like washing clothes without soap powder.
Siri? No. In fact, it works a lot better than we'd thought, really. It's quite effective. The shifts don't come very clean, but the woolen stuff comes very clean. Gets mud off and stuff without any problem. Doesn't need soap and that. But, you can see the colour of the water. Get something out. No, we're all quite impressed with it, really.
If they didn't miss washing machines and detergents, they certainly did miss shampoo. The solution for this was a tub of warm water and a nice lump of clay.
Warmed up the water with our pot boilers. That's why it's got this funny grey colour. I usually get my hair wet before I put the clay on, but that was clay first this time. I find it works quite well for a couple of days, and then it feels really dirty again. But the first few days it feels quite clean.
We did wash during the project. I mean, I don't think Iron Age people probably would have. We used clay slip to wash our hair and warmed up some water, and that doesn't leave it feeling clean. I mean, it'll go squeaky and it feels quite clean. I don't, not clean by today's standards, bouncy and shiny, but it made it clean. And we actually used to bath in a half barrel and heat the water up in that, and use clay to sort of semi-wash with. We did find, because we slept in the sheepskins and they were never washed, there's quite a lot of lanolin in them, that we got little brown elbows and knees were always slightly brown, had little greasy marks on them that didn't come off. But you can't see yourself, there were no mirrors, so we didn't know what we looked like.
essential everyday jobs was grinding the corn for the daily bread on Iron Age quernstones. They ate corn for breakfast, corn for tea, corn with everything. But one of the other staple foods was cottage cheese, made from the curds of soured goat's milk, drained in a linen bag. At this stage, everything was a bit of a struggle, even finding a way of baking their bread.
This is a hole in the ground which we're using as an oven. It's, the idea is that we light the fire in the hole to heat up the ground around, and then when the fire's died down, we rake out the ashes and embers, put the loaf of bread in, put a big stone on top to keep the heat in, and it bakes with a bit of luck. But we're having a bit of problems with this one. The loaf I'm going to put in now is it's been baked once, and this is going in for second firing now.
It wasn't just the practical difficulties of getting enough to eat. They also had to come to terms with the emotional tensions created by living in close proximity with relative strangers, cut off from the outside world. I asked Jill and Pete if this was a problem.
Yes, it's difficult, but I can't think of a way of explaining easily how it's difficult at the moment.
No. Well, the way we are at the moment, we haven't got any privacy at all, and so even when we go to bed at night, you can't even whisper things,
yes, when we want to curse about Sarah Rockcliffe, you can't do it because she's listening to you.
I mean, supposing you didn't want to say things secretly. Perhaps that's just a silly thing, to think that we do want to talk, have privacy, talk amongst ourselves.
Well, we do, because, I mean, you do talk about people, you do express opinions on people,
yeah.
and you can't really do it. Yes, I do. I talk about you all the time.
Especially that,
Or even made love.
Yes. Sorry.
yeah, that's difficult as well. It's all right,
You have to get up early, you see, or go to bed.
Yeah, that's
you have to
right.
get up early and go outside.
Yeah. People go for walks a lot more than they used to when we were living in tents. They don't know what it means, exactly. They do.
Nightly ramble.
Some people were noisier than others, and I could name names, but I don't think that would actually be a good thing to do at this point. And you just really ignored it, and just went your own sweet way.
Wasn't actually something we discussed, was it? I don't think.
No, probably not very much. You just, as other things in other people's habits or whatever was going on, we did give each other that privacy, I suppose, which wasn't really a privacy at all by today's standards.
The heaviest job they'd done up to this point was cutting 3 acres of hay by hand without even the benefit of a scythe, only the heavy, long-handled Iron Age reaping hook. How hard do you find it, John?
Pretty hard. We've tried almost every possible variation of position now, sort of kneeling or standing or stooping, and we've made all the muscles ache that apply. And now we're trying different grips because we've got blisters in various places, so you're having to stick your thumb in other positions, which of course isn't quite as effective. It's pretty hard, quite warm.
The whole group of us spent probably 6 weeks cutting hay that was used over the winter to keep the animals going. And because our scythes weren't sufficiently sharp, it took far longer than it probably would otherwise have done. And after we cut this hay, it had to be carried back about a mile, wasn't it? To be stacked. So it wasn't actually back-breaking as such, it was just so time-consuming, some of the work.
They took in at least 3.5 tons before they finished the job, and every wisp of hay then had to be carried by hand the half-mile back to the village. As an exercise in primitive agriculture, the Iron Age village was beginning to be a working proposition, not not just an experiment, but a truly self-supporting farm.
Does anybody disagree with us handing it all out and each having a piece of it, so we take a share of the bad luck?
Iron Age chieftains may well have ruled by the sword, but for volunteers from the 1970s, decision-making had to be democratic. There was a mysterious burn on the May Day cake, which reminded some of them of a Celtic superstition, and they argued for hours about how best to divide the cake.
We started off with a very formal decision-making process where the cooks of the day, that was one couple, chaired a meeting at lunchtime, and we discussed all the issues we needed to discuss and made decisions on them. And gradually, as the time went on, this meeting petered out, and the decision-making process became more and more like a sort of working informal anarchy, where you try to identify whether a decision was important or not, consult with a few people if it was mildly important, consult with everybody if it was a big decision, and there was a sort of consensus type of approach, and decision-making really evolved as the year went on from a very formal start to a very informal way at the finish. The bean harvest was a disaster, and there had been some people saying, come on, we need to get on and harvest these beans, and some other people saying, no, let's wait till they get black and dry in the pods. And then there was a big lot of rain, and 90% of them or more dropped out of the pods onto the field. So that was a disaster.
Fishing was another skill the villagers had to learn from scratch. They had the use of a stream a few miles from the site, but they didn't manage to catch many fish without modern tackle, so they decided to set up a big fish trap in a nearby lake and try the full frontal approach.
Basically, we're trying to make a catching pen at the back, and we're going to drive the fish in. We're making a funnel to drive them into the back of the pen, and hopefully if we keep people on the entrance, they'll stay in there while we go around with nets or spears and try and fish them out of the water. So we'll drive the whole lake right down up to this top end.
John Percival kept telling us about in Africa. When I was in Africa, I saw this, or I saw that, or I saw the other. And for him, the thing that he really wanted to do was to get us to go fishing African style. And he told us that this would really work, because he'd seen it done so many times. The lake was quite wide, and there weren't that many of us, and the gaps between us were huge, and any self-respecting fish would know that, going forward with this noise would be far worse than swimming through the gap and watching from behind. So any fish that were there got behind us, and we carried on down the lake, and sure enough, getting to the end, no fish. However, John's idea of how deep it was actually knee-high for everyone, so there is a lot of film of bare bottoms.
What do I want? Well, I want artistic, proper.
I'm artistic, I'm artistic.
Unless you do it properly, my chances of being a sex symbol are ruined.
Yes, I was quite shocked. I think because we got to know the camera crew very well, they were coming maybe twice a week to film us, they became our friends, and we got very relaxed with each other, taking our clothes off. We were very hot. It was a very hot summer, and we almost forgot that the camera crew were filming, and now I'm quite shocked to see images of myself on the TV with not very much on.
There were several vegetarians in the original group, but one of them had swallowed her scruples and agreed to eat meat for the duration of the project. The difficulty lay in the communal cooking arrangements and in the lack of tasty alternatives to meat. Everyone liked eggs and cheese, but there were never enough of these to go round. The Ainsworth family remained more or less strictly vegetarian, and this meant that other people had to try and make special provision for them, especially for the children. The whole group also had to face the trauma of slaughtering their own animals.
Emma.
The pig had come snuffling happily out of its sty and been knocked on the head before he knew what was happening. But John Rockcliffe still had to slit its throat to drain the carcass.
In here? How much more does this side need?
Although they'd been prepared for it, none of the volunteers took the killing lightly. As they burned and scraped off the pig's bristles, many of them were in a sombre mood, but Lindsay Ainsworth was in tears.
It's really affected me far more than I thought it would do.
What do you mean? Watching this animal be killed? What does it make you feel?
It just confirms that I'm right, really, I think, for me, personally, to be a vegetarian.
The children aren't at all disturbed, Lindsay?
No, I think that's good, really, yeah. I'd like them to see, exactly where meat does come from and to, think for themselves when they're older. I mean, I, at home, personally, don't give them meat.
Watch out, another one coming.
Did you see the pig killed?
Yeah.
Does that make you mind the idea of eating it, or...
No.
You'll eat some, will you?
Yeah. Like bacon.
You like bacon, do you? You used to be a vegetarian at one time.
Yeah, I know.
But you're not
But I
now.
still like meat. She just doesn't give it to me, but I like it.
Well, the general idea of the project was that we would try and live in the Iron Age environment, so that we would be eating and using the tools of the Iron Age people. There were some people who were vegetarians, and there were other people who were not vegetarians, but who actually didn't really like the meat much. It wasn't necessarily very tasty, especially the salted meat. But we felt that it was important that everybody had a share of all the food. In particular, some of the vegetarian dishes like eggs and cheese were much valued. And so when some people wanted to go without meat and therefore to eat more of the maybe in some ways tastier food, that did cause a bit of dissent. I certainly believe that it was important to have the diet that the Iron Age people would have had, because that was really what we were about.
One summer morning, one of the women said she'd seen Lindsay take an extra piece of cheese. Lindsay said she needed it for little Robin, but that didn't stop the row.
Shouldn't she have more?
I don't eat no, but you can't then turn around and say that eating it
I'm not eating. I didn't say it. No, I said to you this morning. I said I didn't like meat. I gave up meat for moral and religious reasons, the same reasons practically as what you gave it up for. And since I've been here, I found it difficult to eat it at first. And I don't mind it because I spent such a long time telling myself this is flesh, I don't want to eat it. And so I came here and had to say, this isn't flesh. I've got to start eating it again because there isn't anything else to eat. And it was difficult at first, but because I don't mind, I ate meat until I was 21, or whatever it was, 20 or 21 anyway. And I don't mind the taste of meat. It was for different reasons that I didn't eat it.
She's allowed to like the taste, and having
Yes,
decided
I don't mind the taste.
Well,
but I'm
having
saying
decided
I don't
to
eat
eat
it very
it here,
then.
having decided
Do
to
you,
eat it
for
here,
Shan
you
to
can't
say
throw it in
then
her
that
face.
it's
She got 5 helpers.
trying to
It's
fit
not
in that
logical
she's
for a start.
doing it.
Lindsay found herself unable to eat meat, which makes Iron Age life very, very hard. On the other hand, there were Sharon, who had been a vegetarian for a long, long time, but decided to try and live the Iron Age life and managed to do it. But there was an inevitable tension then between Sharon, who wanted to, who would have preferred not to be eating meat, but felt she needed to, and Lindsay, who felt she couldn't eat meat. So Sharon was faced every day and every mealtime with a vegetarian who was sticking to being a vegetarian, and that conflict is great.
Having decided to eat it, it doesn't matter how much or how little she eats. It's not important.
It
was
was
a moral.
if you were... It's wrong to use it as an argument why somebody else should eat it.
It's not really not.
I'm not. You've missed the point again.
No, you've missed it again.
I think it's worth saying that unlike the impression you get from a lot of modern reality TV programs, we were selected in order to try to produce a stable group. So that is why the decision was taken to have couples, not single people, because it was felt that we would be more stable that way. And we were chosen in order to be people who would be able to get on with each other, rather than people who would spark conflict right from the start. So conflict was something that occurred occasionally, accidentally, not it wasn't built into the design of the programme.
The Great Wicker Man, the prehistoric original of Guy Fawkes, was erected on the 31st of October for the Celtic festival of Samhain, which later became the Christian Halloween and is now all mixed up with Bonfire Night. The villagers were determined to have a proper pagan festival.
We'd started making the Wicker Man, collecting the stuff a whole month beforehand, because we reckoned it was a pretty big project that would take quite a time. We decided that if it was going to look at all impressive, we'd got to make it at least 12 feet high, and in the end it turned out 15 feet high. Then when we'd stuffed it with straw and bits of wood, in fact it was so heavy that we could only just get it up. In fact, when we started putting it up, we thought we wouldn't be able to. But it was just the limits of what we could manage, which was quite pleasing.
In a little symbolic mask which they devised for themselves, the villagers enacted the ritual death of the sun god, Labada.
Was fantastic. We decided to make a Wicker Man, and we were very good at managing with Hazel, and we just thought, well, this has to be big. So we carried on and we carried on, and he got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was in the autumn, and we harvested a lot of elderberries, we had our honey, we made elderberry wine, and we had lots of it. And what we did, because we had a sparsity of luxuries, rather than have a little bit every now and then, we'd save it up for a festival. So we had a large amount of elderberry wine, and there was lots of fire and lots of flame, and it was a great night.
They're not bigger, but it'll be tough. Oh, yeah, it's hard, that big. No vegetarian.
When you live a life which is in the same place doing a similar thing every day, a sort of agricultural milking the cows type of life, a festival every few months is something that you really look forward to. You have a big bonfire, you kill an animal, you do things you don't do, you play a few party games, works well.
Looking back at the programme all these years later, we do look slightly silly, I think, but at the time it was great fun, and it was very important to have some levity and fun in our day.
It was the Ainsworths' concern for their children which finally prompted their departure. One of the younger boys fell ill. It wasn't serious, but Pete and Lindsay felt they'd be happier if he was at home. So one November day, they prepared to rejoin the outside world. Most of the others got on with their work as if nothing very much was happening.
Don't get too drunk.
Right, tell us what you're doing then.
Yes.
Oh, we will. Yes.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Cheerio, Pete.
Cheerio, Pete.
You coming, Rob?
Yeah.
I felt a great sense of sadness when the Ainsworth family left, from the point of view of, we'd started out together. The aim of the project had been to be successful as an entire group. It was important to have children there to give the age range, for so many reasons, really. So there was a sense of sadness and failure that we hadn't managed to do that.
Right. Bye-bye then. Cheerio.
It was a big change when they left. There were tensions with the family, and at the time the Ainsworths were the only parents, and now the rest of the group have had the experience of being parents. And I think looking back on it, we were probably not very tolerant towards the difficulties of bringing up young children, in particular in that environment, than I think we would be today.
As the year's project drew to a close, it was time to get an outside assessment of the success of the venture. Professor Barry Cunliffe of Oxford University asked about every aspect of the project.
Well, what about the burnt flints? How do you think they could have come about? Because they're found in vast quantities.
Well, what sort of quantities? Because every time you light a fire in a pit, if the soil's flinty, some of the flints fall in, and then so we make charcoal in these pits like this. And then you take the charcoal out, and at the bottom you've got charcoal mixed with flint, so you fling it all out because it's no good leaving it at the bottom. The next time you do it, more flints fall in, and you throw more flints out.
And these came about from your making charcoal?
Yes. Yes, some I've just pulled out of the side of the pit. You can see the ones that are still earth on one side, burnt from the other. And the others were ones that have been thrown out from a previous charcoal burn.
Yeah. For me, it was a completely unnerving experience just now to walk around the enclosure, because as an archaeologist, I deal with the debris, the detritus of other people's lives, their rubbish. And what I noticed particularly was the rubbish and the remains of activities, the charcoal burning, and things of this sort. And it made me think about activity in a way in which, with all the will in the world, I don't think I've ever thought about it before. So in just pure personal terms, I will never be able to look at an archaeological site in the same light again. I shall go round now and think, it simply broadened my vision of what is possible and range of explanation.
The new agricultural year had already begun. 12 months before, the project had begun with the birth of the first goat kids. Now, once again, there was new life in the Iron Age village. There was no doubt that the village could sustain itself indefinitely, but the year had come full circle. For 12 months, months, the villagers had put up with a standard of living which would appall the inhabitants of the poorest slums in the Western world. They'd not been hungry, and they'd never been really cold, but they had been poor, and on the whole they'd found the experience challenging and enjoyable. They'd also gained some insights, though the experts will continue to argue the toss, into what it was like to live in the Iron Age. But now it was time to return to the affluent society.
Wow,
All good things have to be paid for. The champagne was a present from the press.
No, just right out the label, just the bottle will do.
If the glass is nice and high.
All this way, that's it.
On the 30th of March, they walked off the site, clutching bundles of possessions which they'd made for themselves during the year. Quite apart from the archaeological interest of what they'd achieved, the goods they carried away with them marked a remarkable achievement in self-sufficiency.
You managed?
And then we departed and waved goodbye to the place. It was a very mixed feeling. There was an excitement about going back, and there was a sadness about leaving it in the end of the project.
How do you all feel at this moment, just leaving?
It isn't really striking home. There's too much,
Too many people.
too many people and all this stuff to carry and everything.
Somebody just said, Wicker wasn't the only one to be sorry to be leaving. You mean it?
Oh yes, oh yes. We're all sad, but it's not actually
Real.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there were very mixed feelings because we hadn't seen our family, many of our families or friends, for a whole 13 months, and so that was the knowledge that we were going to see everyone again was good. But I think overall we were quite sad to be splitting up.
What do you want to do with your car?
Now they had to face a return to all the ordinary problems of jobs, homes, and everyday life. But they left behind them, as a very temporary monument, a remarkable testimony to their hard work, their ingenuity, and their sheer endurance over 12 months of living in the past.
Miss not having mascara because it makes the eyes look so much larger.
No. Didn't really make any difference what you look like.
These glasses are so beautiful. They really are. To see the lights that are shining through them and things. And there's all sparkle.
When he came to pick me up, hadn't had his supper, so we stopped in a fish and chip shop, and he and his two boys had fish and chips, and I had fish because chips are not Iron Age.
You've made a bit to meet, haven't you? Yes. When does that get to be? In the future? No, I mean in a few weeks or months. In a few months. See you? Weeks.
I don't like to say goodbye to everyone. I think I'll rush off quick. Oh dear. It's been a long time, a whole year. Living constantly with everybody else. It's going to be very quiet from now on.
I didn't do any blacksmithing for probably 15 years, and then I thought I'd like to do some more, so I built a forge and had it in the garden, And then in the last few years I've been working in a business in a nearby town. It's someone else's business and I go along there and I help them out blacksmithing. So it's something I'm still doing, still trying to get better at.
Well, each one, we first of all put warm drops in their eyes, which is a salt solution with some eye brightening.
After the Iron Age, I went back to teaching until I had the children, and then went back into special needs teaching since. Marvellous, I can walk in the field, my feet aren't cold, I'm not having to worry about treading on sharp things like flints. Actually, you don't get much flint here, but that was a problem in the Iron Age, the sharp flints cutting your feet. Really, what can I say? Everything about them is just perfect. I remember having quite a long time of kind of thinking about, well, how much of the Iron Age do we keep with us and how much do we return to the modern life? We don't want to be known forever as the...
No, it's basically, you know, a lifestyle that is quite satisfactory if you're being Iron Age. Immediately ceases to be satisfactory when you return to modern life. And it was a strange adaptation, though. I felt probably it took a couple of years after coming back before I really felt at home and at ease with the modern living.
Yeah, okay. Come on then. Right, okay. This is a good try. Okay. Sam, do you want to put it in the back?
Jill, Sarah and I do, all three of us work in special education, bringing the children out and creating things with them, being outside with the children in a free environment, I think develops a different learning opportunity, and I love it. We went to a party at some friend's house, and on the way back there was a deer knocked down at the side of the road, and we noticed it, and I said, Trevor, stop, we've got to put that in the boot. And when he brought it home, I said, well, you string it up for me, please, by the back legs in the garage. And although he'd been brought up in the country, the fact that I'd got the kitchen knife put on a plastic pinny, got a bucket and gutted it, well, I think he did surprise him slightly. And I had forgotten that I knew how to do that, really. It was second nature almost, to just think, oh yeah, right, here's a deer, I don't want to waste it. I'm sorry that it's dead, but I'm going to eat it. I like venison. It's really tender. It was quite a young deer, I think. So I'm just chopping this and I'm going to marinate it. I think it's small enough, probably. But you can see on this that it's actually got some blood in it. It's where it wasn't drained. It wasn't hung as soon as it was killed. That's a direct result of the Iron Age project. The fact that it was almost automatic. This is food. I like venison. It's dead already. I want to eat it.
I went back into nursing and really carried on doing what I was doing before the project. But when we moved to Oxford, we managed to buy somewhere with some land, and then we grew our own vegetables and kept our own animals for maybe 10 years.
All us kids are going to try and meet up as well, so
yeah.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Yeah. Mum and Dad brought us up on a little small holding, and so we kept sheep and chickens, pigs, geese, ducks. We had all kinds of animals around the place all the time, because I was just kind of outside quite a lot of the time, and I saw it as being a normal thing, which maybe other kids at school didn't. My brother Mark and I were always really keen on being out in the field, whittling sticks, as children like to do, and building little structures and having kind of camping Iron Age style games. It was only really when we got together with the other kids from the Iron Age group when we actually really identified it kind of verbally as being the Iron Age, and we would try and build a round house and kind of a bit fixated on trying to put bits of baler twine around various animals and bring them into the encampment and live fires, all that kind of stuff. I don't think I was brought up in an Iron Agey kind of way, luckily.
I just think that Mum and Dad had quite a relaxed, kind of outdoorsy, down-to-earth attitude towards us being kids, and that made a difference to us.
This is the issue of the Beano that we featured on the front cover, and it's rather wonderful because Dennis is saying, what a great series this Living Long Ago has turned out to be. Why don't we try living in the Iron Age? And Nasha comes running along holding an iron in his mouth, and Dennis says, that's not quite what I meant, Nasha. But they go on to realise that they'd actually be missing the Beano in the Iron Age, so they're chipping out a copy of the Beano on a lump of stone.
You just happen to have caught us doing some wattle and daubing today. What we're going to do is to cut some hazel fresh from the hedge and then mix up some daub. What I've got here is some clay that I prepared earlier, and it's a nice, got a lovely sticky consistency. And then here there's some cow manure, and I'm told that this makes the best daub. A friend told me that this is because cows have got 5 stomachs, and I'm not quite sure why, that would make a beautiful building material. This is some fibre to help to bind, the straw here will help to bind it all up, and some hair. And this is all hair that we've collected from friends and relatives over the last couple of years, and just seems the right sort of thing to do to make the perfect daub. A good daub has to be done with bare feet, so I'm going to have to get in there and get this really nice and smooth.
Don't think there's room for me, is there, to join you in there? Time for the manure? Whatever it's called. Super stick.
Feel that beautiful green smell to it. We spent many happy hours mixing daub at the beginning of the project, and it really is a good material still today because it's flexible. And it works in well with a timber frame. Good stuff.
We are wattling and daubing the porch. We are keeping sheep. I grow vegetables. We could be doing all those things without having done the Iron Age, but that has given us a certain amount of skills which we have carried on. He likes to work with his hands. I like doing things with my hands in a practical way, and I think that yes, that was useful in the Iron Age, but we still would have done that to some degree. And I think it's more difficult for us to see how Iron Age we are. We haven't made a lot of money. That would have been useful.
Which was a bit of an anathema to me as a pure mathematician to work with computers. I worked there for just 3 years, and the opportunity came up to set up in business with a business partner, and in 1982 we formed Swift Computing. We've got some very high-profile clients, people like HSBC and B&Q and the AA. We've now got in the whole group probably 80 plus staff, and that keeps me fairly busy. It would appear that working in a high-tech environment is very different from working as an Iron Age man. But I would say that we are the same people. We are making best use of what we've got about us. In the 90s I was single, and I used to go to the prom bar with a good friend of mine, Nigel, a birdwatcher, and one day he told me this place is going to close, and I thought, that's a shame. We had a few pints. I said, well, perhaps I'll take it over, and I did. All of a sudden I was the proud owner of the bar, which was a bit frightening. We have fantastic live music, and it's a great pleasure and a great relaxation for me.
You're wearing out the ground. You can't.
I don't take the view that I should live a primitive life, because I am an Iron Age man. I'm just 2,000 years later.
Your future's gonna be your past. Your future's gonna be your past.
What? It's a what? Yours is what?
We started having reunions on what had been the Iron Age festivals. We used to have, for instance, festival fires, and we used to spit roast animals every 3 months.
We still do this 30 years on. We still try and meet up about 4 times a year. I think one of the things that's kept that going is that we all like to do something, and we still do things together.
Are you going to close the door? Close the door.
Having lived in a communal environment, to suddenly be torn apart, if you like, was very difficult. We really, really miss the other members of the group, and that has resulted in lasting friendships where it feels like extended family. If anyone can get to know people that well, living with them for a year and still stand you, you know they're good friends.
I think looking back, I was very lucky to be part of that experiment. It's a shame that society has moved on to such an extent that you couldn't do that again today. We were very lucky to be part of that.
We'd had the privilege of living a different lifestyle completely, but without any of the drawbacks that there could have been if we'd been doing it by ourselves.
So what are you going to do then? You're going to have solid bars alternating?
I am eternally grateful to John Percival for providing this opportunity to do such a satisfying thing.
But end it did. I set fire to it myself one spring day a few weeks after the group moved out. The landlord who'd borne with us so patiently through nearly 15 months of disturbance of his estate couldn't risk the quiet corner of the woods becoming a tourist trap. Burning seemed the best, the cleanest way for it all to end.